This geography revision video is for the STME paper and it's going to be focusing on economic development and aid. So there are different types of development indicators and these show us how developed a country is. So first of all we've got GDP, which is gross domestic product, and this is the total amount of goods and services that are within a country and it is measured in US dollars. GDP per capita is exactly the same except per capita means per person, so the total amount of goods and services in a country that is divided by the total amount of people that are in that country. Birth rate is the number of people who are born per 1,000 people per year. Death rate, very similar, the number of people who die per 1,000 people per year. Infant mortality rate is the number of infants that die before they reach 1 year old, and literacy rate refers to the percentage of adults who can read and write. Human Development Index is an index that takes into account quite a few of these different development indicators. So we look at literacy rate, the life expectancy, how long people are going to live for on average, and the GDP per capita. So those three factors are taken into account when working out a Human Development Index. That means that the Human Development Index is likely to be a little bit more substantial when deciding how developed a country is than simply looking at just one of the development indicators that we looked at before. Okay, so there's some disadvantages of development indicators. So the social indicators like calorie intakes, that's how many calories people have, can be really difficult to measure, but it really does give a really good indication of someone's quality of life and whether or not they do have access to enough food. They can also be misleading if they're used on their own because quite often they are using averages. Using the HDI, the Human Development Index, can often get rid of quite a lot of these problems. So when we're looking at development, we look at four main sectors. We've got the LDCs, the least developed countries, such as Chad, Ethiopia and Angola. When they become slightly more developed, we're looking at less economically developed countries, such as Albania, Poland, Bulgaria. So they're kind of middle income countries. And then we've got the newly industrialised countries, such as China, India, Brazil and Mexico. They're the countries that are growing really rapidly at the moment. And then we have the MEDCs, so that's us, the UK, we've got Norway and the USA. So there's quite a few different factors that affect how a country is able to become developed, and these can be split into social, environmental, economic and political, so SEEP, S-E-E-P. So environmentally, if you have a poor climate, it means you are not going to be able to grow crops very easily, so it's going to mean you can't sell them and make money. That's going to affect your development. If you have limited water supplies, people are going to die from diseases such as cholera and diarrhea, which means that again they're not going to be able to develop very easily because they won't be able to go to work. Economically, if you've got poor trade links, so if you're a landlocked country, you're in the middle and you're not surrounded by sea, sometimes it can be quite difficult for you to trade with lots of other different countries. If you're in lots of debt, it can also mean that you are not able to develop very easily because you're relying on aid. Socially, if again the place of women in society, if women are generally not in the workplace, it can mean that a country is less developed, and it means that it tends to suggest that there isn't an equal standing between men and women in a country. And child education. If not all children are receiving an education, so if it's only the boys going to school, that means that half of the population, the female population, is not going to be able to contribute towards the economy because they won't be able to go to work because they will have a really low literacy rate. And finally, politically, if you have a corrupt government, it's likely to mean that they're not spending the money that they need to in terms of where it needs to be in infrastructure such as education and healthcare, which can affect a country's development. So all of these factors can affect how easily a country is able to develop. Aid then. Aid is simply the giving of food and resources from one country to another. The donor is going to be the country that gives the money and the recipient is the country that receives the money. An NGO is a non-government organisation such as a charity. It's not funded by the government, so that is why you'll see people on the street with buckets collecting money. They're a charity, so they're reliant on people giving them money. Short-term aid is aid that's given in terms of emergencies, so it's money or resources given to cope with an emergency such as drought or flooding. Long-term aid is going to be money or resources given over a much longer period of time, which helps a country to develop. So the different types of aid, you need to make sure that you know these. These are multilateral aid, which is when lots of different countries give aid to just one country. Bilateral aid is simply one country giving it straight to another country. Tied aid is when the conditions are put on the aid. So if a country gives aid to another country, so for example, say the UK gave country to Mali in Africa, they would then say you have to either pay back that money to the UK or you have to agree to buy some of the UK's exports. So there's a condition put in it, and that can often leave countries in debt. Bottom-up aid works with the local people on a small project, and it tends to be quite sustainable, such as water aid or goat aid. And top-down aid is a large-scale project which tends to be quite expensive, and the money is often given to the government to distribute, so it doesn't often reach the people who need it the most. There's quite a few positives of giving aid. It can help people stay alive in times of emergencies such as drought by giving them water, and it can help countries to develop if it's long-term development aid because they receive skills that they're able to then be independent with. Negatives: countries can sometimes become too dependent on the aid, which means that they're not able to develop by themselves in the future. The aid may be misused by a corrupt government, so it doesn't often reach the people who need it the most. And tied aid, as we mentioned, can mean that the country has to pay back that money or agree to buy the exports, which can put them in debt. Bottom-up aid: it works with the local people, it gives them skills to become independent, it's often very cheap to implement, and it works with the people who need it, often using appropriate technology. So this is a technology that is easy to use, it's simple, they don't need that much training in it, and it's going to be cheap to implement. Top-down aid tends to be a large-scale project which often involves the government, is expensive to implement, doesn't always help the people who need it most. For example, the dam that was implemented in China, the Three Gorges Dam, they had to flood a lot of land, which meant the people who lived there had to be relocated, and they weren't involved in the jobs that were used to build the dam, so they didn't really benefit from it that much. And they're often newsworthy developments. So for example, the Three Gorges Dam in China was a huge media attraction, which meant that the country got a lot of media attention, but again wasn't helping those people who really needed it the most in the local areas. So this has been a quick stop of aid and development. If you click on the next video, it's going to go through industry and the impacts of industry. Thank you.